Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server-related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features, or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Hey, compañeros, welcome to episode 91. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome. We hope you enjoy it. For tuning in. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome. We hope you enjoy it. For those who have been listening for a while, thanks again for joining us. We've got a great lineup today, Steve. Very excited about who we're talking with today.
Oh, yes, we do. I think that this is one of the larger recording sessions we've had just based on the number of people for quite a while.
No, that's right. So that, presents some certain challenges, but lots of enthusiasm. So today we're ultimately talking with the DBA Tools team, right?
Yep. And DBA Tools, in case you haven't heard of it, check out dbatools.io on the web. It's a pretty cool tool set, and it's not something that I had really even heard of much before doing this episode.
Yeah, so we're joined today by Chrissy Lemaire, who has kind of kickstarted the idea, and we'll get into how she started and then started reaching out to others. Rob Sewell is with us, Konstantin Kokonis.
All of those names. And what they've done is they've put together a SQL community project around PowerShell and SQL Server.
Yeah, that's right. And so I was kind of geeking out a little bit as well, particularly, and again, we'll get into this, as that Konstantin was not a PowerShell guy, right? One of my hesitations for kind of jumping into the tool set was, I'm not really strong on PowerShell. And then he said, I did not know PowerShell before I started contributing to this project. And I thought, okay, now that's something I can grab onto. And I thought it was interesting. So ultimately, our conversation revolves around what the tool does, how they've been able to use it in different formats. And then, of course, we do get into kind of a community project and how they're putting together some of those pieces.
Yes, indeed. So on to the shout-outs.
That's right. Andre is talking to us.
Yeah, so this week, or I guess I should say in the last week, we received a comment from Andre Ranieri. And Andre is someone that I've known for a few years through different past events. And his comment was, "Great compañero podcast on being the lone DBA in the shop. There was an awful lot to relate to in my own experience." And I can see how true that would be.
That's right. Lots of people reaching out to us about episode 89, the lone DBA. Tom Garvin is another one on the East Coast. He said that he likes the podcast, but he thought episode 89 was one of the best. And that idea of being the lone DBA, lots of people sympathizing or remembering, if you will, those struggles of being the only one in the shop with those responsibilities.
Yep. Another shout out was on Twitter from Brent Ozar. And he said, for a podcast topic, how about talking to speakers about whether or not they're introverts?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of conversation as to, so getting out into the community and the kind of shared, well, I'm an introvert as well, but I still go and do these things. Here's why. Here's how I get over it. Those kinds of things. And, I think maybe doing a little bit of research, it would make an interesting episode.
Yep, I think so. And for that first-time speaker trying to break out and get comfortable, it's not always easy. And I think that being a little bit introverted makes it a little bit harder.
That's right.
But it doesn't mean you can't do it.
Exactly. We also have a comment from Jose Mueller. He was listening to the episode on SharePoint, which was episode 88. And he said, great episode. Interestingly enough, could we do something similar to BizTalk, right? It poses many of the similar challenges. And so thanks, Jose, for that feedback. I've actually reached out to a couple of the BizTalk MVPs, and we'll see if we can't line something up here in the coming episodes.
Yep. Excellent.
And so thanks, Jose, for that feedback. I've actually reached out to a couple of the BizTalk MVPs, and we'll see if we can't line something up here in the coming episodes.
Yep. Excellent. I think that BizTalk, like SharePoint, is one of those systems that as a DBA, generally you're told just don't touch it. And I think that'd be great to have an episode on that.
Exactly. Okay. We do have another announcement that I guess we wanted to talk about. And that is, again, we've been talking about the Compañero Conference. Will be happening in Norfolk, Virginia. One of the things we also wanted to mention was that we will be having an opening social mixer. Some of the details are still yet to come. But if you're coming in from out of town, or even if you're a little more local and you, for planning purposes, that evening of October the 3rd, we will be getting together in the evening. Of course, that will give us the option of passing out the name tags and getting acquainted.
People arrive the day before for the conference to be ready to go the next morning. It's just a good opportunity to get out and meet everyone for the first time. And I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep. And just a reminder on that, if you want to check out the conference, it's at compañeroconference.com. Take a look and see what we've got going on there.
And now it's time for a little SQL Server in the news.
All right. Well, this week, the news item that I came across was SQL Server command line tools for the Mac. There's a preview now available.
Yeah, so those on the other side, right?
Yep.
You too can have the opportunity to work with SQL Server.
Now, what this includes is the SQL command tool and BCP. And that's it. Two very powerful tools there, but I think it sort of signals an indication that Microsoft is trying to go a little bit more cross-platform with things here. Microsoft is trying to go a little bit more cross-platform with things here.
Oh,
and
sure.
I think a lot of people have speculated, now that SQL Server runs on Linux, that they may be able to run that on their Mac, but that's not always the case.
Right.
But that with SQL Command and BCP being there, it'll make it easy for either getting to the SQL Server or getting data in or out of the SQL Server from your Mac.
Right. To at least be able to check things, particularly if you have views or other things that are kind of there, ready, available. You could quickly do that and make that a little easier.
Yep.
Okay, so the show notes page for today's episode can be found at sqldatapartners.com/DBA Tools. That's tools with an S.
Or at sqldatapartners.com/91 for episode 91.
Awesome. I think let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with these guys and see what they have for us.
Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, today we are in for a real treat. We want a child of that project here in the studio with us today. So we want to say hello to you all. This is probably the biggest group we've ever had on the podcast. So we're excited about that.
You're welcome.
Yes. The more the merrier. And we're going to prove that today. And so I guess I'll kick it off with you, Chrissy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this project, how it got started, and then we can kind of go around and we'll go from there.
All right. So DBA Tools actually didn't start out how it is now. Initially, way back in 2014, I created a bunch of migration commands, and I made a little project on GitHub called SQL Migration. And then I started adding a couple things like get SQL Server key, where it dug into the registry and it grabbed that information. And then I just kept adding more. And over time, I realized that it could be more than just a registry, and it grabbed that information. And then I just kept adding more. And over time, I realized that it could be more than just a migration tool. So I called it DBA Tools, and then I just started marketing it that way as a general PowerShell tool for DBAs, and it really took off from there.
Now, are all of you, and I guess we'll maybe Rob, do you want to jump in? When you got involved with the project, were you looking at it from a migration perspective?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I've always been a SQL and PowerShell person. So Chrissy and I got together and created this SQL collaborative GitHub collection, which is where I ran from SQL conferences. And so we got together and started working from there on.
So, Rob, how long after the original work that Chrissy had done was it that you got involved with the project?
So, Chrissy, when did it change from being migrations to being DBA tools? I'm not sure the exact date of that.
So the official, I think that I saw its birthday was sometime around September 2015 is when I changed the name of the module. And then really everything, and let's see, in April of 2016, I registered the domain. And in doing that, I wanted to make it more approachable for DBAs and for non-developers, because GitHub is kind of not the place for people who are kind of apprehensive about PowerShell. And so from there, we started Slack. And I would have to say that was about the time that it really started to take off. Whenever we started the SQL community Slack channel. So the first command that was introduced by the community was Claudio Silva. He is from Portugal, and he gave us expand SQL tlog responsibly. And then the command after that was whenever Rob contributed remove SQL database safely. And that was around April or May of 2016.
Okay. Well, so I think it would be worth kind of noting here, because Rob kind of mentioned it, that he was a PowerShell person. So really quickly, let's go through and kind of talk about where I'll just use the word expertise, right? So that may be a strong word, but how kind of you got involved with the project and kind of where you were coming from. So Konstantin, you actually want to start for us?
Yeah, sure. Actually, I had almost no PowerShell experience. And honestly, the reason why I saw the kind of interest in DBA tools and why I was interested in it was because I didn't have that experience, and the migration videos, the intros that Chrissy had put together were so good in such a small package that I said, I need to learn this. This absolutely calls me to learn PowerShell more than anything had ever before, really. So I had a lot of T-SQL experience. I had programmed silly things in pure SQL, and I saw this and went, I want to throw that all in the trash and replace it with this.
Okay, so now interesting. So you've talked about the migration, and that's kind of how it got started. Do you still feel like this is primarily a migration tool?
I don't actually, and I think that's part of why it's increasing adoption. It's increasing adoption is because you referenced it earlier with the whole thanks but no thanks. In reality, for a large portion of DBA Tools' existence, Chrissy has been extremely accepting of what does DBA Tools do. And we've had a lot of conversations about what are we really trying to solve here? What problems are we solving? Do we go beyond that, or where does that lie? And I think one of the benefits of DBA Tools is we've said, as long as it's really solving a DBA problem, it probably belongs in DBA Tools. And that has allowed a lot of people who don't have all of the experience to contribute their individual pieces make it better.
Is there anything that will help make a DBA life easier that isn't something that's likely to be provided by Microsoft through the PowerShell SQL Server module? So we won't add database, more complex, useful things than that.
Okay, well, so then how would you describe some of the features that are now inside of DBA Tools then?
Well, honestly, I would describe them as really awesome. I mean, that's a very basic thing. But the reality is, one of the things we started to deal with and kind of struggle with, but also find good solutions for, is the idea that, wow, we have a ton of PowerShell commands here doing a ton of different things. And so some of our big contributors, like Neil Flood on Slack, have actually put together some in-browser things and also some PowerShell-based help things, if you're more into that, to help you narrow down on keywords or on related pieces. PowerShell has some pieces to help you with that, but again, we're not really targeting the heavy, amazing PowerShell users. We're targeting people who are just starting. PowerShell has some pieces to help you with that, but again, we're not really targeting the heavy, amazing PowerShell PowerShell users, we're targeting people who are just starting and who want to build something great in their environment. That's not always someone who's going to know how to use the help command even.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. I think you've described to me perfectly.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the reasons I was so interested in having you guys on and talking a little bit about this. So if someone doesn't need to then know too much about PowerShell, obviously they just have to have a SQL server. They can download your stuff. How do we get started?
Okay, so I'll jump in and answer this one. If you go to dbatools.io, there's going to be a download section that you'll see at the top. And what I did was I created the site thinking of my own favorite open source projects. So you have Notepad++, for example. When you go there, module different methods for downloading DBA tools. The first one is like really direct. We have it in the PowerShell gallery for systems that do support the PowerShell gallery. So it would just be install-module DBA tools. But if you don't have a modern system, then you can also just copy and paste a single command. And as long as you have either SQL Server Management Studio 2008 and above installed, or the SQL Management Objects, SMO, it's just going to download, put it where it needs to go, extract it into the proper directory, and then you'll have it. So it's a really straightforward download, and that enables you needs to go, extract it into the proper directory, and then you'll have it. So it's a really straightforward download, and that enables you to have over 150 commands with a single command.
Very cool. And so just to be, I guess, clarify, because I'm not familiar with the PowerShell gallery, this would require some additional setup before you could use that route?
So the PowerShell gallery, it's built into Windows 10, and it allows you to kind of like, if you're familiar with Linux and apt-get and all of their package managers, this is PowerShell's package manager. And there's a gallery where a whole bunch of software publishers have placed all of their stuff, and it makes it easy to download. It's kind of like, imagine a command line Windows store. So instead of being in the Windows store, we are in the PowerShell gallery. And if you have older systems, then we have links on our website that you can just click to and you install it. Install is something that was really important to us because it is migration. We're expecting this to work on legacy systems. And so it works on PowerShell version 3 back all the way to Windows 7. So it works all the way, from Windows 7 and above. And anytime that we have vNext that comes out, we test our commands on that. And fortunately, Microsoft has been like really standardized in the way that they support SMO, that our commands really just work with the next version of SQL Server.
Right, and I think to their credit, as much grief as we sometimes like to give Microsoft, that whole idea of backwards compatibility,
love it.
Yeah, it really does work nicely.
Totally.
So on those legacy systems, one of the things you mentioned was the SQL Server Management Studio and the SMO objects. With that, if you don't have the right ones there and you try and do the install, is it going to tell you that, or are you going to end up in a bad situation?
I actually...
Or are you going to end up in a bad situation?
I can't remember why I decided on SQL Server Management Studio 2008. I might have tried it with 2005, but basically it's just kind of going to throw the same errors that you have whenever you try to use SQL Server Management Studio, because really DBA Tools is kind of like SQL Server Management Studio at the command line.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Got it.
And if you are still using 2005, right, do yourself a favor, right? Upgrade.
More things that, but what's really awesome is that a lot of times people may not want to upgrade because they're like, oh my God, this migration process is so daunting. And I have this, 100-point checklist. And then if you just use PowerShell, if it's possible in your environment, then it really simplifies that entire process.
Certainly does. And the important part of all of that is that that's only on the client machine.
Thank you very much, Rob.
But not so you can have older versions as your servers, but the client machine, the one that you log on to do your DBA work, that's the one that needs to have the right version of PowerShell and the right version of Management Studio.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I actually did a test. If you go to dbatools.io/install, there's a video there where I backed up a bunch of databases on a Windows 2000 server that cannot have PowerShell installed on there. And that was really to emphasize what Rob was saying, which is that PowerShell doesn't even need to exist on the server. What's really important is the client. So that makes it a lot more simplified.
Yeah, SMO basically just is running queries. It's just abstracting a lot of SQL.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you run Profiler against the SQL Server when you're using PowerShell SMO to connect to it, all you see is T-SQL. It's not doing anything magic.
So that video that you mentioned about migrating from SQL Server 2000, I watched that and I was just amazed at how easy it was to do it with, or how easy you made it look to run through all of that. You just run a command and it moves things over. So if someone's out there and they're stuck with a SQL Server 2000 box and they want to move to something newer, how big of a jump can you make with that using the DBA tools to do that migration?
Well, by default, so we kind of go as max as possible. I have a lab that's set up that has 15, maybe 20 different kind of instances. So what they would have to do first, Microsoft does not even allow the path from 2000 to anything above 2008. So if you wanted to go to 2016, this would be super simple. You would first migrate to 2016 from there. And of course, you'd have to test your applications and everything like that, but we do make it possible in that way.
And so have you seen that type
Chrissy,
of a jump from 2000 to 2008 and then to 2016? Have you seen that go off smoothly? Or do people usually have a lot of code migrations they have to deal with?
I would have to imagine that there would probably be a lot of code migrations. Unfortunately, I don't get a ton of direct feedback about, those legacy systems. It's mostly just like, hey, thanks, that was super awesome. But there wasn't details like, but we really had issues on our application side. Because really, no matter how you do it, we kind of just automate the way that you're going to do it anyway. You're going to make a backup, and then you're going to restore it, and then you're going to make a backup, and then you're going to restore it. And this just kind of makes that a lot more straightforward. And also, what I really like is that we do introduce some protections. So, if Microsoft doesn't really recommend you do a detach and attach from 2000 to 2008, then you have to use a -force command to say, no, that's really what I want to do, even though Microsoft doesn't really want me to do it.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, there are pieces completely missing from, like database roles or server level roles in SQL 2000 compared to SQL 2016. And so most of the times we do best effort.
Yes.
Here's what these are the equivalents are, or we need to prompt the user and basically say, we're at an inflection point where you need to make a decision.
Right. Okay. So part of the process is, as I watched one of those videos and going through it, and I just want to go try it out myself here, but was you do the migration from like your 2012 to the vNext video I think I watched, and it just showed you run it, it does the backup, it does the restore, it moves the users, it moves the job. One of the things that I was thinking through there is, in the demo, of course, it's smaller databases and it goes really fast. But if you're in a position where you have larger databases that are going to take a while to copy, are there any options, or is there anything that would like do some transaction log backups and get it caught up to a point in time? Or is there an option to?
I love that question. We are working on it. And that was something that I actually thought that I had to have for the 1.0 update. I was like, I don't even want to go 1.0 until we can go really enterprise. And we actually decided that we had so many commands and this really awesome framework that's going to come in 1.1 or 1.2. We are currently testing a mirror. I think it's like invoke DBA database mirroring, to make it easy to,
Right.
It was the log shipping to make it easier to do that. That is something that is on the agenda, but currently we don't support.
Okay.
Currently we don't support.
Okay. I think, well, even without that, it's incredibly valuable. That would
right.
Because
What you
nice
can
thing to
also
have.
do is do the dash no recovery, and that'll really help simplify your process as well. And while we're talking about this, I did test this to ensure. I have personally migrated 500 gig databases, but people have reported back that they've had 2 terabyte databases that have worked with no issue.
Okay,
So we do go really high as possible.
great. I look forward to trying that out.
Mhm.
So we've talked quite a bit about the migration piece, and I guess maybe, I don't know, Aaron, if you're still there, we'll invite you to join the conversation here. Give me an example of how you're using the DBA tools aside from the migration component.
So one of the things I love about the DBA tools that I was able to get in just under the deadline for the cutoff for 1.0 was actually click on a database and do the disk usage report. And you want to expand the little option there to show if there were any auto growth or auto shrink events. I stole the code out there to find the auto growth events. And the reason I did that was it's great information, but I wanted to be able to see the entire instance all at once. So what I did was just wrote up a quick PowerShell function and, started up my pull request to the DBA Tools project, got it merged in, and now everyone's able to get this kind of information across the entire instance with a single command. And that really only took me, about an hour and a half of my time, from start to finish, to be able to take something that I needed, that I thought was useful for lots of people, and, added to the project. And now thousands upon thousands of people can use it.
Aaron brings up
Thousands upon thousands of people can use it.
Aaron brings up a really important part that I really love. My favorite thing about DBA tools, there's a couple things. So the first thing is that we see an awesome blog post. Oh yeah, that person makes such a good point. And we take that T-SQL and we stick it into a command. And now just across the board, everyone can use it as soon as they update DBA tools. And the other thing is, what Constantine had talked about earlier is that, here's a bunch of DBAs who have issues or problems, and they solve it using PowerShell, and then they can put it in DBA tools, and now every DBA across the world can easily access the thing that they did. And that was something that Aaron shared with us. So he had an issue, he solved it, and then he contributed it to the project.
One of the other things I love about DBA tools is when the SSRS team was putting out PowerShell commands for SSRS, they were doing it just kind of like script-based, standing to be able to say, hey, look, we don't think you're doing it right, and we think you should do it more like this. And they had a look at what Chrissy was recommending. It took them a day or two of deliberating, but they finally came back and said, yep, that sounds right. We're going to do it like you suggest. And I had an article published in MS SQL Tips just last week on how to deploy the SQL Server SQL Performance Dashboard from the Tiger team using only PowerShell. It will download the reports for you, download the module for the SSRS commands, download the SQL file, deploy the reports, deploy the SQL file that you need to be able to get all this information, all these performance metrics, and it'll run it across your entire enterprise for you. But it's one script and it does it all. And very excited to make it that much easier for people to use these free tools. The Tiger team spent this time getting it out there so that people could use it. And then we've just greatly upped the number of people who are able to download and use it. They actually told me that. And then we've just greatly upped the number of people who are able to download and use it. They actually told me the number. I don't think I'm supposed to share it, but it's a big number.
Right. So this is kind of where, again, my mind, the knuckle dragging Neanderthal, right, that I am, I hear PowerShell, blah, 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 blah. Oh, one script that will do all of this. Oh, okay. Now all of a sudden I'm very, very interested. And, ultimately for me, it's a lot about that value, right? Instead of having to do these 10 things, right, that I had to do before.
Right.
That ability to have one script, one way to do it and execute it, that's really cool.
Sure. So yeah, what I basically wanted to bring up was talking a little bit more about that value and that reusability, because I have, run many scripts within the community, within the SQL Server community. There's the Blitz scripts, there's OLS scripts, there's all sorts of are reproducible and reusable, but there's still a lot of code going on. And there's always the question of what is that code quality? And so a lot of people use some sort of, social currency to determine, oh, everyone says OLS scripts are good, I can use that. It won't destroy my environment behind my back with them. But I'm not going to necessarily review every line of code.
Sure.
And when you see a project like this, moving your whole SQL server, it is really important to have that kind of currency, because if everyone is doing it the same way, if everyone's using that option in SSMS, you can too. It is okay. And yeah, that's really why one of the big reasons I like DBA tools becoming popular is because we can kind of encode the best practices for the community. And if they don't think those are the best, they can come back and help us fix them.
Absolutely.
So then with that process, if someone decides to jump in and help you fix it, and then they do the work, they do a pull request, do most of those type of things make it into the project, or do you end up weeding out a lot of those along the way based off of the code review process?
It is very important to our team that people feel welcomed to DBA Tools. So if you go to dbatools.io/team, it actually says the team is me, the team is you. We really encourage pull requests. So if they submit a pull request that doesn't quite meet our standards, what we will do is kindly mentor them and say, I really emphasize hey, be nice to new people. And people, the team really jumps in and they are super nice. And they're like, hey, you could have done it this way. What about thinking about it from this perspective? And you can go through any of our pull requests and see that. So in addition, they also get to learn along the way. And Constantine, it was so amazing working with him, because like he had said, he hadn't had a lot of experience with PowerShell, and I did his code review for him. And he said that in one code review, he had learned about 2 years worth of PowerShell knowledge.
That's not a joke either. I had spent, not directed effort, but 2 years picking up random pieces of PowerShell and putting them into production, even in some cases. And then sat down and Chrissy basically, in the most polite way, set me straight and said, here's things you want to do, and here's why. And I spent 2 weeks just reading the code she had given me versus the code I had submitted, and learned so much. It's why I'm here today.
Wow, that's really spectacular, because that's not always the norm in the open source community, or even in GitHub. Always the norm in the open source community, or even in GitHub. And I think that the way
or anywhere,
or anywhere,
the way you're doing that is spectacular.
I promise you, these are the best code reviews that you will ever have. You'll come out of them feeling good, even though somebody might have ripped your code to bits. It will have been done in a way that says, okay, that's not how we do things. We've learned along the way that there's a better way of doing this, or this is more performant, or if you look at it like this. And we put examples of those up on the website as well. But we're very much about team and community and family. It's supposed to be fun. We're doing this in our spare times. You don't want to feel like you're under a boss who's glaring at you all the time. It's something that we pride ourselves on.
Yeah, it's very important that people feel welcome. Then anytime that we have to close a pull request, if I had to guess, I think that we're at most have been closed without being merged. That's the part that hurts. And it does, hey, we actually have this command, and it's this one. And so it is important to us that people do feel welcomed, and that their code gets merged in. We actually, anytime that we make a release, you'll see it. We added 4 new contributors to the repository. We want people to understand GitHub. We want people to understand PowerShell, and we want them to feel like a part of the community, and to not be, a pariah just because they don't necessarily know PowerShell right away.
And the other part of that is as a team, we've got some people who know good PowerShell, and we've got some amazing T-SQL and DBA people, but we also need people who can write documentation. We need people who can help with testing and continuous integration and all of those other parts of it. So we're not just about writing some code, integration and all of those other parts of it. So we're not just about writing some code, we're about writing the good code for you, and we're making sure that when it goes out there, it's as good as it can possibly be, all from a community in our spare time project.
So as you mentioned the community and the spare time side of it, one thing that I see with a lot of projects like that is they tend to wander a bit. But I'm curious, with DBA Tools, do you have a vision or a goal of where you see this going, like a year from now or 2 years from now?
Yeah, I do. I would like it to be the standard in everyone's toolkit. I would like hundreds of commands. We are currently at, I think, 175. We've only announced about 150 because the process to make the web pages and everything like that, it takes a little bit. But we are already setting the platform for being able to explore hundreds of commands. So with Exchange, their module that Microsoft, they have 700 commands. And currently, I think the SQL Server module has a little less than 100. We are making it so that they are very easy to find. There's going to be a lot of tagging with categories through their website. But I do expect that this will be part of, and I've been told by really kind people who are emailing me saying, I've seen this it's becoming a standard for DBAs. And that's what I would really like, because it simplifies database administration. And for me, it makes it super exciting. It's fun. I don't have to, like with test DBA last backup, it's no longer a burden to have to test my backups. It's so fun to sit there and watch it work. It'll perform a restore, and then it will perform a verify, and it'll make sure, a check DB or a check, and then it will perform a verify, and it'll make sure, a check DB or a check table. It'll make sure that everything works, and then it'll drop it, and it just does all the work for you. And you sit there and you're like, man, I enjoyed testing my backups.
And I've got a nice fuzzy feeling that everything is okay.
I can sleep at night.
Yep.
It's true. It's so nice.
Sure. Without adding to my workload, right? I don't have to stay late. I don't have to.
Yeah, you can automate this. I automate my SQL Server migrations. I set that on a scheduled task, and then I check it in the morning. It's amazing.
Very interesting.
I think I might have to watch the first one.
You watch the first one, you watch the second one, the third one, you grabbing a beer, you're like, whatever, I'll come back. It worked the other few times. I'm cool with it. That's where I'm at now.
Yep. It's really interesting because you always hear about how the role of the SQL Server DBA more productive and not fall along the wayside as things evolve. And it seems like the DBA tool set here would be a really good way of keeping up your skills and continuing to grow as a DBA.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And not only because of PowerShell, but what I really love about this is that it's the whole DevOps process. For a while, we were most of the DevOps process, but we didn't have testing. And then Rob came in and put in a whole weekend's worth of work. And now we even have pester tests running across the board on every single one of our commands. And so if you want to learn PowerShell, GitHub, and DevOps, this is really an ideal project to work on.
Very nice.
Very cool. Well, we do appreciate the conversation. I know that we want to continue with some of the community things, but should we go ahead and do SQL Family now?
Sure.
So, Chrissy, tell us how you first got started with SQL Server.
All right. I actually wrote this out because I have a terrible memory, and I was thinking back. It was actually a good time. So back in 1999, I worked as a startup as a Linux and Windows administrator. But our DBA wasn't super helpful. He got let go, and the dev team asked me to fill in And honestly, I had always been curious about SQL Server. When you go to the tech section of the bookstore was always my favorite. And I'd always see SQL books. And I was like, man, Oracle. And then I installed Oracle and I was like, nah. But then I installed SQL Server and that was really awesome. I loved that. I have always been primarily administrator, but I've also liked development, and that really SQL Server serves both of those needs. So I picked it up, I loved it, and then I became a web developer in DBA for the startup, and then I went from there.
Great. So if you could change one thing about SQL Server, what would it be?
What would your guess be that I would like to see more about with SQL Server?
Oh,
I'd say PowerShell commandlets.
Yes,
yes.
absolutely. I would actually love to see more PowerShell commandlets from Microsoft. I would like to see the module open sourced and put up on both GitHub and the PowerShell gallery. And in addition, I would also like the SQL Server Management Studio. Their grid little thing, it's not nearly as powerful as PowerShell's out grid view, which allows not only sorting, but filtering in so many ways. I would really like to see that brought into SQL Server Management Studio.
Interesting. We're actually going to have a conversation with the program manager of the SQL Server Management Studio, so I'll have to make sure we pass that along.
Awesome.
and I would agree that whole grid result set in Management Studio is very limited.
So
It's always surprised me.
if you can imagine the question, do we have X in this table? And your table is 30 columns wide. If you do that query and put it into out grid view, you can type in and you'll get your answer in seconds. It is
not just the column, but the data as well. It's incredible.
So within a 30 column wide or 50 column wide table, and you need, you're asked, is this data in? We've got email addresses in, for example. You could search hundreds. I've searched hundreds of thousands of rows in a single table just for the data that's in out grid view because it is so quick.
What's the best piece of career advice you've ever received?
Back in the .com, at that startup that I had previously mentioned, our CEO, he had 2 doctorates in engineering. I think it was like mechanical engineering and computer engineering from an Ivy League school. He didn't let us call him doctor. He was super awesome. But he told me to drop out of college because he said, this is the .com and this will never happen again. So if you drop out now and you gain experience, whenever this busts, and it will, you will be able to get a job. And so I talked to my parents about it. They weren't excited. And then I talked to him about it. And I was like, I don't know. And he said, how much do you think that you would make if you dropped out? Once you graduated. And so I told him, and he said, okay, I'll give you that. And I was like, all right, bye. And so I dropped out of school. And then I went back years later when I could afford it. I got my bachelor's at the University of San Francisco. And then after that, I could hold a full-time job and go to school. I enrolled in my master's program, and I'm currently 3 classes away from getting my master's. So that was actually my best career advice ever, was to drop out and then go back whenever school suited me.
Very cool.
Okay. So if you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why would you want it?
All right. So my superhero power would be regeneration. And the reason I would want it is because I'm a hypochondriac and I'm always worrying about getting some disease or getting into an accident. And if I had regeneration powers, then I wouldn't have to worry about that anymore because it would just fix itself.
Nice.
So we promised Chrissy we'd download the tool and kind of jump in and start taking a peek at it. And we've had varying degrees of success there. I guess we can report back that we've both downloaded it. But at least I admit I haven't as much time as I would have liked to have kicked the tires. But I am interested in getting into more of it and learning more about the tool.
Yep. And I've been able to download it, and I've used it against multiple instances at different locations. And I'm happy to report that it's a pretty darn cool tool.
Yeah. And I think what they've been able to do, putting together that Chrissy's kind of focus and dedication to starting with something small and then reaching out to others and making it bigger than her original thought. Hats off to her. I think it's a super cool idea. And she's invested a lot of time and energy into making it, inclusive, if you will, and very, very accessible for everybody to use.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I caught in there that they mentioned was sort of the number of participants they have, and that when somebody comes along and they want to participate and contribute code on the GitHub project, a lot about making them feel included. And I know that's different than how a lot of source or open source projects that I've seen have worked. I know I've tried to contribute on things in the past and people come back with a lot of attitude sometimes, where
Sure.
With this one, it's all about making people feel involved and be active and learning how they do their process.
Right.
And that alone made me interested enough that if there was something I wanted to add, I would consider participating.
Yeah. And in fact, after this conversation or in preparation for it, and then talking, because we've talked with other folks that are doing open source projects, if you will, and it made me think about ultimately doing an episode on that idea of what does it really take to get an open source project off the ground. You hear about it much more on the development side, right? So the SQL Server folks, we might, contribute to a project here or there. We might, contribute to a project here or there, but I don't think it's quite as common, right? Maybe sharing scripts might be a slightly, more tangible approach, if you will. But I thought there are some cool people doing some pretty cool things. And so I thought we could take some of their experiences, put it together, and provide some feedback or some thoughts on what makes a successful community project, kind of sharing some of the lessons learned, if you will. And so that way, if you're thinking about doing something like that, how can you help increase its chance of success, of survival, so that you're not the only one contributing to it, basically?
Yep. I think that'd be a great episode. And I think that, what we learned on the podcast today was that there's so much more to it than just throwing some code out on GitHub and saying, hey, contribute.
No, exactly.
And one of the things that this group has built is they've built the Slack channel at tools.io/Slack. And I think they've got over 2,000 participants on their Slack channel now. And it's not really solely focused around the DBA tools. It's really focused around building SQL community.
That's right. There are channels in there for events, DBA fundamentals, or kind of the virtual chapter kind of idea.
There's even a SQL podcast channel in there now. Since we did the recording, I think they went and created that.
That's right. And so, yeah, it is a place for you to jump in. And, again, there are lots of people in there. And so you do have to kind of, jump in with both feet, if you will, and start meeting some people, but a very friendly place. And, you can ask questions and get help there.
Yep. Another big takeaway that I had on today's podcast was around the DBA tools to be used when you're migrating an entire SQL Server instance. That's an area that every time I do a migration, it seems like there's always a lot of checking and double checking and making sure you got all the users and the permissions right and all the jobs. And I think that looking at some of the demos that they had on here's how you migrate an instance and being able to include those things in the process that have been a pain or have been difficult in the past, super cool. And I am certainly going to take a look at using that next time I need to migrate an entire SQL Server instance from one box to another.
Right. Well, so in fact, that's how I came across the DBA tools, was because somebody mentioned, because I'd been using like SP Help Rev login, right, to migrate those logins, because it will help you do the encryption and whatnot, so you don't have to worry about passwords and things. It's always a pain.
Yep.
And I think I may have saw Chrissy's post or somewhere I saw a post that's saying, hey, if you're still using that, like, old and busted, new hotness, right?
Yep.
And that seemed very
Yep.
And that seemed very compelling. And so, yeah, being able to do some of that, we're going to start working with that a bit more. And of course, compañeros, we're interested in getting your feedback, your thoughts. The team was very gracious with their time. We were interested to know, are you using, the PowerShell components of the DBA tools? Give us your feedback. Let us know how you're using it, what your best feature or option is. And then, of course, we can't say all of that without saying, if you've come across something that you think could either be improved or you can contribute to, don't be afraid to jump in. I know particularly from a documentation perspective, they're looking for some help. And so don't be afraid to submit your contribution.
All right. So next week's episode is on SSDT.
Yeah, we're talking with the project manager, Kevin Kanan of SSDT. And, we invited him on to kind of talk a little bit about the history. There was a little bit of that confusion because there were multiple products, if you will, named SSDT, and then kind of working through some of that and where the future of the tool is going to go.
I look forward to that next week.
Our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardian, used under Creative Commons. If you have questions or comments, of course, you can reach out to us at sqldatapartners.com/podcast.
And again, the show notes are available at sqldatapartners.com/DBA Tools or /91.
If you're social and want to connect with us on Twitter, I am at Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am at SQL EMT. And we'll see you on the SQL Trail.